today's World Insight. China's top diplomat on a neighborly tour to Tokyo and Seoul. What's on the agenda? And health QR codes going global, with China leading the way as a safety measure for travel. How feasible? Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today's show with a look at Chinese Foreign Minister and State Councilor Wang Yi's trip to Japan and South Korea. China's top diplomat is set to visit Tokyo and Seoul from Tuesday to Friday. It is the first visit by a high-ranking Chinese official since Yoshihide Suga became the prime minister. And it comes after China and Japan agreed to a first round of tariff cuts as part of RCEP regional trade deal. And later this week, Wang Yi will visit South Korea. So where is China's relation with East Asian neighbors heading? The impact on the region? Let's loop in our panelists to talk about all the details. For more on Chinese foreign minister's visit to Japan and Korea, joining us in Beijing, Teng Jianquan, director for the Center of Arms Control with China Institute of International Studies. In Seoul, Yunjun Lim, associate professor with the Division of International Studies and director of the Office of International Affairs and Public Relations with Konju National University. In Tokyo, last but not least, Naoyuki Yoshino, Professor Emeritus from Keio University in Tokyo. Thank you so much for all of you joining us. First of all, Professor Yoshino, it's good news that China and Japan are likely to have some new travel mechanism after months of closing somewhat the border toward one another. Tell me more about it.
Corona pandemic has been spread after Europe became very large, and we are slow to stop visitors from Europe first. And then the Japanese pandemic has started to grow. And then hopefully it's coming down recently. So it is very important to have strict rule, but we can start our exchange of people. And political visit is very important. Then next is business visit, and academic scholars, students, general public. So we should set up a very nice rule, and so that it can be implemented much further. I think the personal connections and dialogues, talks are very important face-to-face that will tell to the general public in Japan.
Yeah. Professor, of course, we already heard about the new arrangement between China and Japan regarding business travelers. Tell me more about how this would work.
I think the business activities are very important to look at the factories and staffs and so on. Remote suggestions, remote announcement is not well, especially in manufacturing industries. So I think the face-to-face visit will improve our business relations. That is first. Secondly, financial businesses and services sector is also related to the looking at the factories and places at the businesses are going on. Without those face-to-face and via reviews, businesses are very difficult. So I think this movement will be a very good first step.
So tell me more about how it works.
I think that currently we should stay in the test in the airport, and that is a very nice way to check it. And also the business activities will become much more fluent, and that will be the second step. So it is make sure that the current test is enough to protect our COVID spread in both countries. That is very important. So first trial, we have to watch for 1 month or 2 months whether it works or not. And if that works, we can keep on going. And if it does not work well, we should stringent a little bit on the test and other things. So I think first trial is very important to start up the connections between the two countries.
Pragmatism certainly is the spirit, in a way, for Northeast Asian economies. Professor Tang, how do you see the re-establishment of business traveling between China and Japan as a result of the listed visit by the Chinese State Councilor Wang Yi?
Japan and China are good trade partners in decades, and this time, the resumption of the tourism between the two countries, I'm sure, will give some, a positive impact on the development for trade between the two countries. Also, will enhance the cooperation in fighting against the pandemic this time. After a month of closing of border, I'm sure this time China is willing to open its gates more wider to some countries like Japan, because we are neighbors. We should have some cooperation in trade, in fighting against the pandemic, and also we can cooperate in some other areas to enhance the peace and stability in this region, and to enhance the development for economies in the two countries.
Ms. Lim from South Korea, I know China and South Korea are also thinking about some of these possibilities. How is it going so far?
Well, we are very excited to have Mr. Wang Yi today. From today, he's going to stay a few days here in this country. And we are also probably excited to have some more like a positive outcomes just Japan had with his visit. Because as you probably remember, a few days ago, over the last weekend, G20 APEC were held virtually. And then our President Moon Jae-in also, he highlighted the importance of resuming the economic activities and having a kind of exchange or travel of essential personnel. Which was actually adapted in the joint statement of the G20 too. So even though we still are suffering from the spread of the virus, even in the country or in the region, but still at the same time, we cannot sacrifice all these economic activities forever. So from the probably very pragmatic step, as you just mentioned, we hope, we want to expect more like a positive success or positive improvements of the economic activities across the border.
Talking about the economies, certainly everybody has been very impressed by RCEP, which has been agreed upon by economies of ASEAN countries and also China, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia. This put a new momentum into the discussion about global trade. Having said that, though, the three economies in Northeast Asia plays a crucial role in making it happen and in implementing it perfectly. So how do you see the three economies can correlate in this regard when the rest of the world are still trying to struggle with the pandemic? Ms. Lim, would you like to go first?
Sure. If we recall our memory before America actually left the TPP, and TPP and RCEP were kind of, in a competitive relation. And then many actually experts or policymakers were interested in watching which one will be concluded earlier than the other. But as you just said, RCEP was concluded finally, and 15 countries, including ASEAN, and as you just mentioned, 3 East Asian countries, it was concluded, which is very much, I think, cheerful for any economy in this region. TPP, of course, US left, and now Japan is, of course, leading the progress or the dialogues. Again, the President Xi already showed a kind of positive interest in joining the CPTPP too. So trade is actually should be regarded, should be appreciated more, I think, than before or than any other thing, because all this economic interdependence is really our reality in this region. Based on that, we can move on further. Again, we can trust more, and we can, less concerned about those security-related issues or unnecessary escalation of any physical violence, potentially all this economic interdependence can contribute to the mitigation of the risk.
What you said
So
is really,
I'm very, very much optimistic about those multi-level framework for the trade in this region.
it's very interesting development, isn't it, Professor Tang? I mean, just think about it. Last year, people were still talking about, the competition and the geopolitics within these mechanisms. But now, China has been talking about, let's, think about joining CPTPP. The Chinese president has been openly talking about it. And now China, Japan, South Korea are all inside this RCEP. And this region has become a leading figure in making the economy revive again globally. So what we are seeing is a really evolving picture. Things are happening very fast, Professor.
This is actually a good idea or perception for the Chinese government and for our leaders. They all, used to be very cautious in this regard, but now they would like to be more open and to be more active in participating these multilateral, mechanisms in trade and in some other cooperations. I think this is actually a result of the development of globalization of world economy and the new administration, in the United States, Joe Biden, will, to my understanding, return to some international mechanism, including CPTPP or some other trade mechanism. This will give other aspect of competition between China and the United States. So the attitude change this time by the Chinese leaders is an echo or response to the coming, administration in the United States. And I'm sure Joe Biden and his administration will give some, very, very, active or serious consideration on the multilateral cooperation in trade in Asia-Pacific region. So China would like to join such development and give very active cooperation with some other counterparts in this region.
So, Professor Yoshino, this makes things much more interesting, isn't it? After the U.S. left the TPP, Japan held high this platform, the flags of it, and make it a CPTPP. Now, there's a possibility that the U.S. might coming back. And then also China's willingness to work with this platform, CPTPP. Meanwhile, already working with partners in Northeast Asia on RCEP, have made this conversation much more diversified and much more fascinating.
Yes, I think Japan, Korea, China has developed exporting our products to US, Europe. But middle-income class in Asia is growing. And production networks between Japan, Korea, Japan, and China has been growing. So I think that bilateral trade, multilateral trade, regional trade in the Asian region can upgrade our economic growth and prosperity. So we are not only relying on US and Europe, but Asian growth can create our mutual networks, including Southeast Asia. So this RCEP will create one more step to grow Asia as one of the economic leader in the world. So I think three coordinations of this RCEP is very important for the growth of Asia, not only our advanced nations, but also developing nations in South Asia, South Asia will be mitigated and also gained a lot. So this leadership of three countries will be very important for the success of Asia in future.
People have been saying there were some traditional concerns about the territories, about the allied relationship with the United States vis-a-vis the U.S.-China geopolitical kinds of possibilities in the region. So how will this relationship in Northeast Asia between China, Japan, South Korea, three huge economies, work? This is a very interesting question, Ms. Lim.
You're totally right. We still have the conventional security issues, North Korea's nuclear issue, is still on the table, which didn't probably show enough progress yet. So that is definitely should be regarded as the top priority by all the three party, I think, because as long as North Korea just keep doing so, I mean, we cannot move further because it always does provide a good justification for anybody to use for its own security purpose. So again, definitely North Korea's nuclear issue, we definitely need to work on. And non-conventional security issues like global warming, climate change, or all this like public health issue or even cybersecurity issues, those things also are the common challenges, I think. So as long as we share common interest in our economic prosperity, I think we definitely need to talk more and try to manualize, institutionalize our rule, and the compliance to the rule is also, I think, a very important for the more like sustainable development of this region.
Professor Yoshino, your thoughts?
I think three countries together to look at same directions, such as climate issues and social security and poverty reduction. And those are very important for all of us, and how to mitigate income disparities in each country. Those topics could be coordinated together, and we can discuss much more what kind of policies will be good.
Professor Tang.
In recent years, that the United States did play a very active role in the cooperation among the three countries. I mean, China, Japan, and South Korea. Number one, the Diaoyu Island dispute. Actually, the years before 2012, China and Japan did have good cooperation, including the trade exchanges, and also they would like to have free currency exchanges at that time before 2012, but suddenly changed the development in I think late 2012, just because of the dispute of Diaoyu Island. Why? Because the United States had committed to Northern administration that the military treaty between U.S. and Japan would cover the Diaoyu Islands and its islands. Another case is the THAAD, deployment of U.S. Military equipment in South Korea. Actually, in 2015, the then president of South Korea gave very active support to China's development in the free trade zone in Northeast Asia, including the participation in AIIB, and then suddenly the deployment of that of the United States in South Korea. Then the relations between China and South Korea, was deteriorated since then. So I think the United States sometime was a very active player in the cooperation among the three countries in Northeast Asia. So we should be very cautious this time. We would like to maintain the current momentum and cooperation among the three countries, but we should take the consideration of the influence of the United States in this area.
Tang Jianqun, Jinzhang Lim. Now, Yuki, Yoshino, thank you so much. Everybody has their own perspectives, so certainly they are all welcomed here. Thank you, really appreciate it. Coming up on World Insight, health QR codes going global with China leading the way as a safety measure for travel. Will it work? How feasible is it? Some answers after a few reminders.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The world is changing fast.
taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. At the G20 summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed to the world a global QR code system as a way to help open up travel amid the pandemic. It involves a mechanism that would allow global recognition of a person's travel and health records, including COVID-19 test results. QR codes are in widespread use in China and certainly increasingly over the world. Since February, they've been used to provide a person's health status and travel history in China. Getting a green pass after scanning a QR code in China, meaning a person is healthy and can travel despite of the pandemic. While a yellow or red code means individual has to be quarantined. Because using QR code do not require physical contact, it lessens the risk of virus transmission. Well, that at least is the argument for the QR code. To understand better about this debate and whether that idea will work, not only in China, but also on a wider basis in different parts of the world, let's loop in our panelists who definitely have their own attitudes. For more on the global QR code system, joining us in Beijing, Dr. Jay Huang, founding partner of J-Stone Capital and former managing director of Intel China. In Bangkok, Jeffrey Towson, former professor of Guanghua School of Management with Peking University. Last but not least, in Atlanta, Chen Zhuo, associate professor from the Department of Health Policy and Management, University of Georgia. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Certainly, that is an interesting proposal, isn't it, Dr. Huang, about proposed by China about a global health code system so that people beyond border could travel freer than it used to be.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting proposal. Probably never heard about it before. As we all know, under the barcode and in China during the pandemic and has been widely used and has been proven quite useful to track the people where they are. And then if they have been in the area which have the COVID-19 victims, and then the people will require to quarantine for like 14 days. So this practice is quite common in China, but don't know how useful it would be across the border.
Well, that is a debate going on, Mr. Towson, about what can be accepted by individuals given their very different political system and top concerns. So what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it obviously is a political question. It's also cultural. certain countries, certain cultures are just
It's
more
not a health
comfortable with
question?
this than others. It's both. I mean, it is a health mechanism that has some degree of effectiveness, but it's not the only one. And there is going to be some trade-offs between various countries. The US is probably not going to go for mass contact tracing. A good portion of the population wouldn't accept it. Other countries like Japan, we see widespread adoption and it seems to be okay. So there's going to be a trade-off. It's a political question, country by country. But you can definitely see that this is going to make a lot of sense for certain countries that have this system. If Japan and China want to start doing more tourism, and both countries are already comfortable with this system, suddenly that opens the door to things like, okay, let's open some trade and tourism between the countries again. I mean, in that case, it starts to make a lot of sense.
Professor Chen, it's very interesting now in sporadic countries around the world that COVID-19 prevention control so far has been successful. So do we see the possibility of using the QR code system among these countries and make travel freer, easier?
Yes, I do think that such a system would help to ease the travel restrictions. It's where contact tracing has been proven to be very effective to help them to identify who might be at risk of being infected. And this is going to help in terms of mitigating the impact of the pandemic. And I think having such a system would definitely help to facilitate the travel of people and also of goods. But I do agree with Dr. Townsend that there's a lot of things that we have to consider, whether it's political and cultural. And in the United States, I think there's a lot of resistance to share the information with a centralized system, whether it's a government or a private company. I think there's a lot of hesitation towards that aspect.
And that's the fascinating part of this discussion, isn't it? Dr. Wang, you have been in China over the past year, so you know how the QR code works.
I think in China, almost everybody have to download the application, and then coming from different sources. Some of it is from like a central government and agencies, some from provincial government, and some from the popular like WeChat organization, etc. And then people are using this app and to show where they have been. And then if they go into a shopping mall, for example, and then they have to use this app to scan a barcode. And then the shopping mall owner or shopping mall organizer will know who actually come into the mall. If later on they found out and somebody in the mall during the same period of time has been tested positive, for example, people can tracking out who have been in the mall during the same period of time, and then have to follow on you and then ask you to be quarantined either in your home or in a designated places like a hotel or whatever for 14 days. That's how things get carried on in China.
Of course, it is not done without any reluctance. For example, when some detailed questions are too much when it comes to privacy, there are also a resistance coming from individuals. For example, I have been asked with questions that I do not see as relevant, not about the QR code, but rather of some kinds of questionnaire designed by any individual organization. Once you come into their building, I could ask these questions to them and say, these are the things that I do not want to ask you, and I do not feel the responsibility to answer you. And they sometimes adjust the policy. So it's very interesting, Dr. Huang, just to go further into the discussion, how a general framework can be established and how much nuance actually exists within this general framework, Dr. Huang.
I think the practice here leave people pretty much with no choice but follow the rules. For example, you want to do shopping or you want to go in a restaurant, Before you can, get into the restaurant, at the doorsteps, you have to show you have one of the apps. You have to scan their and the barcode. Otherwise, you cannot get into the restaurant, get the services. Similarly as a shopping, etc. And also the buildings. If you want to visit somebody, and in the building, you also have to do this. So you have literally no choice but follow the rules. Regardless if you like it or you don't like it.
No, I don't agree with that at all.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Towson.
I mean, you can say that if you're a restaurant, you say you must QR code to come in. Certain people like myself would say, okay, no, thank you. Good luck with your business. There's lots of restaurants in this world. I can eat at home. So I think the businesses would bend very quickly, which is what has happened in a lot of countries. And I've done the same with office buildings when they say we need to scan your passport. It's like, I'm not scanning my passport to come in. So it's not one-sided, but it does depend on how much the government enforces it. If the police are out there enforcing it, okay, it's probably going to happen. If it's just the businesses, there'll be a little give and take there, I think.
That's true.
So I would have to say this. If you can find a restaurant which does not require you and to scan the barcode, you definitely have a choice. If all the restaurants require the same thing, and then it leaves you no choice, and you either don't go to the restaurant or go back to your home, you have to follow the rule. That's the situation in China. You can now find a restaurant, and then, it doesn't require you to scan it.
The rule is the rule, of course. However, at times there were loosening implementations of the rule. But, as a consumer, I do feel there's a lot of, there's this trouble that I have to go through in order to get into a restaurant because I have to scan my QR code. But on the other hand, if they don't ask me to scan my QR code, I become a little bit nervous because I do not know actually whether I have a safe environment that I'm going in, because the other places are doing it. So interesting, isn't it, from even an individual perspective, Mr. Chen, about the two sides of the story?
From my experience in the United States, people are quite divided. There are folks who are strong about the protection against the potential risk of being infected. And there are also folks who are not, they don't really care. I think such a system would be very useful, but given the situation, the cultural and also political background in the United States, I think it's going to be a challenge to implement.
Right.
I'll give you a couple of examples. I teach in a college, in a university, and we have to abide to two major legislation. One is FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and also HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Privacy Act. So these two legislation really has a lot of restrictions in terms of how the university, how the college department, and also as me instructor, how we can reveal information. If I know that one of the students in my class, he tested positive, whether I can share that information with others. Those are forbidden by the HIPAA and also by the FERPA. So there's a lot of rules that we need to follow in the States. I think, and unfortunately, I think this may be some conflicts between the contact tracing and these rules. I think if we wanted to implement such a system, we need to sort out these legal implications first.
How do you see the extent of acceptance for the general public at the time of a pandemic? Many would say this is emergency situation. It is unlike before. So some of the rules and regulations that we used in ordinary days, should they still be the standard that we look at? Should there be some kinds of adjustment to a certain extent with the respect to privacy, but at the same time addressing the urgency of the pandemic? Dr. Huang.
In China are pretty much on the imported cases from international travelers. And then it's before the vaccine can be widely used, I think China become more like an island and without much of this and infected and immunity built into the people. And then they have a risk to see the imported cases from international travelers.
I wish you were true. However, scientifically speaking, it is not. Because herd immunity, I'm afraid Dr. Huang, probably Professor Chen could help us to explain. It has to be a very high percentage of a population to be infected before herd immunity can be developed. For example, with COVID-19, it's likely to be 70 to 90%. That is the latest information I get from the top experts around the world. So that's far from developing immunity that you have been wishing for in certain populations around the world. Let me go to you, Dr. Chen, about your thoughts, what Dr. Huang just said.
Herd immunity probably is not, well, there are two ways of herd immunity. Having vaccination,
that's one thing.
Vaccinate majority of the population. That's one way of herd immunity. That's probably the preferred way. Having the population being infected and acquire the immunity, it's well, it's possible, but given the case fatality rate of COVID-19, I think that's a huge risk to the elderly and to those with pre-existing condition, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. We want to be able to, protect elderly and those with existing conditions totally away from the risk, right? So yeah, I think herd immunity through the natural acquired of the immunity, I think that's going to be a very tricky, very, to some extent, probably not putting the lives of the elderly in our objective function. I think if we can make these apps, the QR codes, have a good interoperability across different platforms, different apps, I think there's a way that we can connect, the QR codes in China and QR codes in Australia and those in Japan. I think that's maybe one way we can work with different countries and having a international QR code, which will help in the facilitation or will facilitate the travel of the people.
Given the fact that right now, many countries have developed these kind of apps and citizens are having the choices to subscribe to. But in some of the European countries that I got to know, for example, only half of the population will use the apps. And that's a debate inside their countries, a huge one, whether to use it or not, to what extent and privacy vis-a-vis public health. We see that is still going on. Given the fact that it is, even 50% could be quite a big goal. Do you think globally a mechanism can be really established?
That's a very tough question.
I know.
I think my experience in the States, I think probably less than 50% will be willing to take to use the app. Google and Apple actually started one contact tracing app back in April, but I don't think the take-up rate is that high in the United States. So there is a lot of hesitancy towards such contact tracing efforts.
So now what is the solution? Because the world has to move, right? Mr. Towson, you know that very well. You are an economist. And the world economy already having huge dumping effect as a result of COVID-19. We can't let that to continue for too long. Even with availability of vaccination, we'll not be able to reach the herd immunity that we all wish for in short period of time, not within the year, next year, I mean. So what can we do in order to at least to ease the pain on the global economy?
Yeah, I think my assumption from the beginning has been we're going to be learning to live with this because viruses they tend to stay around. We haven't cured very many viruses as a species. We just get better at managing them as they surge and fall over time, whether it's the flu or whatever.
We're not waiting, but we should not do a passive waiting period of time. So what we're talking about is proactive. Do we need to be proactive? I want to just get a word from you. Or shall we wait until the vaccine, until the virus goes away, which according to scientists is not possible?
I think it's going to come down to government ability to execute. China, regardless of what tools you give the government, QR codes, whatever, is fairly effective at making things happen. So is Japan, so is Singapore, so is South Korea. When you start talking about QR codes in California, where I'm from, I don't know anyone who thinks that government can execute very well. The UK did not do a good job. So the tools will change. The situation will evolve, but I would kind of look for management ability as my number one factor for who's going to keep this thing under control going forward.
Mr. Chen, your final words.
Yeah, so I think the direction of having a international version QR code, I think that's a good step towards the right direction, but there would be a lot of hurdles in implementing such a scheme. I think there should be a lot more collaboration, and there's probably also needs cross-sector collaboration. One of my wild guess is that if we can engage insurance company in developing and promoting the contact tracing apps, I think that might help. Yeah, but I think that's something that we need to find out.
Very interesting. Certainly, we see this is a hot debate, and what is the best policy? Nobody knows. Probably we'll have to, as they say, groping the stones while across the river. We'll see how the pandemic are going, and how we can have the best policies at different points. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your input from different perspectives. Jay Huang, Jeffrey Towson, and Chen Zhuo. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Certainly an interesting and heated debate about the QR code. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching, and bye for now.